Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Cinema Flow podcast. I'm your host, Zach Abdulbaki, and today I'm joined by a very special guest. He is the writer and director of American Murderer, which is one of my favorite films of the decade so far. It tells the story of Jason Derek Brown, a fugitive wanted for murder and armed robbery. The film was released in 2022 and has had a long cultural lifespan on streaming. The film became a top 10 hit on Hulu in the US, as well as various international platforms. As of this recording, American Murderer is back on Hulu, and I highly recommend that you all check it out. Now, without further ado, it is my honor to introduce you to one of the best young directors working today, the man, the myth, the legend, Mr. Matthew Gentile. Welcome to the show, Matthew.
Ah, wow, what an intro. Thank you, Zach. Great to be here.
Thank you. Of course, it's my pleasure, and thank you for taking the time. I have a lot of questions to get to about American Murderer, but before I start, I want to go back to the beginning. Could you please tell the audience where you were born and raised, and when did you first realize you wanted to be a director?
Sure. So I was born and raised in Brooklyn, New York. Grew up in the city, loving the arts from a pretty young age. And the origin story for me is when I was around 12 years old, my father began showing me a lot of films that I was perhaps too young to see, such as Dog Day Afternoon and A Clockwork Orange and movies I just really, that captured my attention. And after watching Dog Day Afternoon with Al Pacino and just really being captivated by the concept of the anti-hero, my mother one day we were walking through New York City and it was winter and it was actually Hanukkah and she was buying me a Hanukkah present that day and she didn't know what to get me and she saw me. They used to sell screenplays on the streets, these vendors in New York. And there were a bunch of screenplays laid out from like all kinds of movies that were probably printed off of the internet. Today now you can get a screenplay, any screenplay you want, you can find. But back then it was like there was one website called Drew Scriptorama. This is back in 2003, 2004. And my mom saw me eyeing a copy of Dog Day Afternoon, printed out bootleg script copy, and she bought it for me for $10 as a Hanukkah present. And that was the first time I learned what a screenplay was, and you know that words on a page could become film on a screen just instantly fascinated me. And so I had a VHS of the movie, and then I had the screenplay myself, and I would kind of read the script, watch the film, and I wouldn't say that was the one incident that made me, oh my God, I'm going to do this forever, but it was definitely the start. And I started making films when I was in high school and with my brother, actually my older brother, who's now my composer on the film. He's a pianist and conductor professionally, and he also composes film scores now, starting with American Murderer. But he and I made some films together as the Gentile brothers. So it was always in there, in the DNA of like wanting to do films, wanting to make films. I was always just fascinated by them and loved them. Growing up watching TCM and films with my father. But yeah, so it's been a long gestating thing for me. I've wanted to, do this for as long as I can remember.
That's amazing. And it's nice to have a mom who, kind of helped you, pursue that passion and everything. I understand that you went to AFI Film School later on, and when you were there, you made a film called Frontman about an emotionally self-destructive rock star who loses his hearing, which leads to the unraveling of his personal and professional lives. This film won several awards from various film festivals and awards bodies. I was wondering if you could tell the audience a bit about the making of this film, because I'm sure you learned a lot of lessons on this that led to American Murder and everything later on.
Sure. Yeah. So, AFI was where I got my graduate degree in directing. And, you know, film school is a subject that a lot of people debate. Should you do it? Should you not do it? For me, it was an incredible experience. I rank going to AFI as one of the best decisions I've ever made in my life. It was just such an amazing place for me where I learned so much, grew so much, met so many amazing people who are now my colleagues and friends. So I'm a big proponent of that experience. And for me, AFI was just an incredible hub, where there were so many talented classmates I had too, and teachers who were making films. And, Frontman was my thesis film. And AFI is an interesting experience because your first year you make three cycle films, they call them, where there's three short movies that you make in the span of an academic year. And these movies don't go outside the school. Like that's by rule. You can make the greatest short film ever made, doesn't matter. It never leaves the school. Most people don't in their first year because the point of it is to really learn and grow and become better. And I was definitely somebody who I was getting better with each one, My first few were not a home run. And then my second year, your second year at AFI, you make your thesis film and you only make one. So you kind of learn the lessons from first year and then hopefully take it to your second year and make a strong thesis. In my case, that is what happened. And Frontman, at the time, the project actually had a really interesting genesis. So, AFI has a strange process with these films. It kind of echoes like the studio system in a way where they you have to get your thesis film greenlit.
Yeah.
So directors, writers, and anybody actually can submit a script, to get their thesis film greenlit for production the next year. And I had written a script, but it didn't get greenlit. So I had to kind of find something. And a lot of people thought I might do a thriller film or a crime film because that was kind of what I had done most of the first year. But there was a screenplay in the pile of greenlit scripts that did not have directors. One was called The Golden Age of Rock and Roll by a writer named Andy Ciara, who you might know. He went on to write the modern classic Palm Springs, and he was my classmate. He's a good friend of mine. And he was not doing that project. He had two other scripts greenlit because he's such a good writer, but he had a premise about a rock star and I felt that that was an interesting arena to explore, the idea of a rock star. And then me and my writing partner on that project, Corey Wilkowski was his name, we came up with the concept of doing a rock star going deaf. And I should point out that this was before a Star is Born and Sound of Metal
Yeah.
by some time. But and it's there was a film that came out before called It's All Gone Pete Tong. The idea of it's taking the classic scenario of what's the worst thing that could happen to a character and just make it happen to them. So we thought a rock star going deaf would be that, and so we explored that and took it and ran with it. And the film. There's a lot of great people involved. I mean, Todd Sheridan, my cinematographer, did an amazing job, and he you know, justly won a lot of awards for his work on it because he really was an incredible cinematographer. Um, and but the lead actor Christopher Palaha, who was in the short, he was really something to work with. And I had met him because my first job before I went to film school, I worked at William Morris Endeavor in the mailroom, and one of my jobs was taping actors' auditions, which for me was a true masterclass in directing actors because. And I didn't like set out to see it that way. I just had a job in the mailroom. It was my first job in the industry. I didn't know anyone. I didn't, know how to like navigate this field. But someone, had given me advice. If you want to start out in the industry, just go work in the mailroom of a talent agency because you'll kind of see the hub and how things are connected and whatnot. And one of the jobs of being in the mailroom, there are many. You do anything they ask you to do, whether it's go pick up a client's, laundry or read a script that weekend or, anything. There's a book called The Mailroom that details all the crazy stuff that goes on in the mailrooms. But one of the tasks I loved was taping auditions, and because not just because it was fun to watch actors work, but sometimes actors would actually ask me for feedback. So I would kind of be directing actors without realizing it. And Chris Palaha, who starred in my thesis film Frontman, he was one of WME's clients who would come in and tape a lot. And so I got to know him over a long period of time. So when it came time to do my thesis film, he was starring on a TV show called Backstrom with Rainn Wilson. But he did my short during his hiatus in between. So it was really special to get to work with him and watch him do that performance because that was my first time working with, someone who I was like, oh wow, this actor really, can brings a lot to the table, and just elevates every scene or role he's in. He was always striving to make it better, and I think that energy reverberated throughout. I always say the dynamic between a director, lead actor, cinematographer, first AD, and producer. Those five, not that, and there's a ton of other department heads and people, but those five kind of, in a way, set the tone of a set. And it's at different times too, which one's, the central one. But the lead actor really, is number one on the call sheet, right? And it's a big job. And so he was really, yeah, he was a special guy to work with, and we're good friends and still are to this day. But yeah, Frontman was, a any movie, as you know, I'm sure many directors on your podcast have talked about, is a confluence of so many things coming together. They're not done by one person, as much as some people might seem to think it looks that way. You know, a director I compare almost to being like the heart of a body. And there's a lot that goes on in a body, there's a lot of different moving parts. And so, Frontman, yeah, that was a special one to make. It just, it fell with Chris and working with him and that whole team, just us making our thesis film. And I would say at AFI, we were a pretty underestimated team. Um, in that it was a script that wasn't, my script wasn't greenlit, so I was doing kind of I was venturing into new territory for myself. The team was all new people to me, which wasn't the case of all the AFI teams. Um, but we came together and we worked really well together, and I think we made something, yeah, we were all really proud of. And that got recognized, thankfully.
Yeah, I should also mention you did Landman, right? Which is another acclaimed short film, a Western based on a true story.
Yes, Lawman I got to make
Or
with
Lawman.
Lance Reddick,
Yeah.
which was a really special thing, and that was a unique scenario because usually you only do one thesis
Yeah.
film. I had actually graduated by the time that one happened, but what had happened was I graduated, Frontman had won a lot of awards and all of that, but I was kind of struggling to find my foothold and like figure out how to, get directing my first feature and other shorts as well, just like to keep kind of the muscles going. And then Lawman kind of fell in my lap. The school called me because a director the year below me had actually dropped out. And so they said, would you like be willing to accept a TA salary, like saying very, very low money to come direct a second film? I said, well, last year I was paying to direct a movie. So this year, I'll take it. And it was a really great experience. The cinematographer of Lawman, Kalila Robinson, she actually originated the story for that. That was her idea, to do a film about Bass Reeves. The first, not the first, but one of the first and definitely the most prominent African American deputy in U.S. history who arrested 3,000 outlaws in a, you know, 40-year law enforcement career. I mean, he has many fascinating stories. We told us the story of his first mission. Um, and Kalila had really, it would have been a passion project, dream child of hers that she wanted to see get made. And then I got to facilitate that with her. And then she went on to shoot my first feature, American Murderer. So all these movies, yes, they're such a training ground. Short films are so valuable because in a way they're very low risk. They may not feel that way when you're making them. I know they certainly didn't to me, but looking back on them, they are pretty low risk because short films are a chance to try, fail, see what works, see what doesn't. Um, to make a great short film is incredibly hard, harder than it seems. It's very different from feature filmmaking because a short film in a way is like a haiku, whereas a feature is like a novel, perhaps, or a novella. And so, in comparing those, what makes a short film really work, it is a unique thing onto itself. So, I don't necessarily know that despite, as you pointed out, my short films were very acclaimed, but I didn't necessarily see them as short films that were, the greatest short films ever. I saw them more as like strong, small features. Smeechers, we used to call them at AFI. They were like trailers for features, because, they were breeding grounds for what I was trying to, what I'm doing now and trying to do now. So, but yeah, they both were incredible experiences where I met people, Chris Young, the editor of Lawman, was one of the editors on American Murder and my script editor for American Murder. So I met a lot of my tribe and village at AFI during those shorts, and people I worked with on those shorts did worked on my feature. I met my visual effects guy on both of those shorts. So yeah, it's incubating and creating that kind of creative energy and meeting people, like-minded people who gravitate towards the same kinds of stories you want to tell.
Well, clearly you did something right on the first one with them asking you to come in on the second one. I mean, that must have been very validating. And also, I want to mention that, you mentioned that you were working at WME after school, and if I'm not mistaken, that led to part of the cast in the American Murder Proof of Concept. I was wondering to tell the audience a bit about the multi-year journey of getting American Murder made, and I know that went all through COVID and everything. It was quite a cycle. Yeah, anything we could learn from that, especially.
Yeah, so I actually worked at William Morris Endeavor before I
Okay.
went AFI. So yeah, my path was, just to recap, college. I did Connecticut College. I did a English major, film studies major as well. Um, I did a semester abroad there in Prague, where I studied at film school, and that was the first film school experience that made me go, okay, I think filmmaking is what I'm going to commit my life to. Before that, I'd kind of toyed with different things, maybe doing journalism or maybe doing another, something film adjacent. But I always was like, no, it's film. It has to be filmmaking. That was what got me excited and got me, wanting to go to class. Um, and so after college, I worked at William Morris Endeavor for about a year and a half. And I had applied to AFI before I had worked there, and I got rejected. I get really close. I got interviewed. They told me it looked like I was going to get it, and then I like the last second was cut. So I harassed the admissions counselor and I asked them like, why didn't I get in? Because I felt I was close. They'd kind of acted on calls like I was close. So I asked them like, why didn't I get in? They said, well, you need to like do something. Your short you made in Prague at the film school I did, semester I did abroad in Prague, showed promise and showed visual aptitude, but you know, the work with actors, we need to see more of that you can handle that. And I said, oh, well, I love actors. I know actors. I used to be an actor when I was younger. I'll get actors. I got you. So I go and I work at WME for a year and a half, and I made a movie on 1 week's paycheck, which I think at the time was like 650 bucks. Um, so I made a short film off of that. I shot it in my father's office, like one weekend, slept in the office with the crew. You know, like just total like early 20s, like us making something, together. And then that short was the one that got me in to AFI. And I got in and went there. And actors I had met while working at WME were kind of always percolating, especially actors I met while taping. Um, so fast forward, I graduate AFI. I now have my thesis films. I'm trying to figure out how does one go about becoming a director. I toyed with maybe, I was like, maybe I should, try to be a director's assistant while I try to get my feature off the ground. I'd heard kind of mixed advice on that. And, one thing I should say to anyone listening, certainly to anyone at all, is that there's no one way to do this. There's no linear path. That's the tough thing about, I think, both being a director and a screenwriter, is that there isn't one single way to break in. It's everyone's path is different, and like it almost feels sometimes like once you hear of someone's path, it's like you can't do that path, like because you have to find your own way through. But one thing that I saw and noticed after my shorts had kind of gotten me a couple water bottle tours and meetings and things like that was that the thing that really mattered was having material. Meeting after meeting was kind of teaching me the same thing, which was, they were like, cool, we really liked your short, shows you can direct. What do you got? What can you do for us now? And I had features, I had written a couple, but none of them were really quite right, quite ready. And weren't necessarily right to do as a first movie, which, you want to do ideally at a budget for which you can raise money. And so for me, and that money people will support you doing, I should say. Um, I was, I was like, what does that first feature look like? I was like, do I try doing something really micro budget? I was very excited by like what the Duplass brothers were doing, and encouraging filmmakers. Do I try to do something like that? Do I try to do like a 10K feature? I wasn't really sure. And then I really came down to, okay, well, what matters most? What's the story you want to tell? And the story for American Murderer had kind of been buried in my subconscious. I was, as a kid, obsessed with the FBI's most wanted list. And when I was about 14 years old, this is in 2004 through 2004, and I had learned that Jason Derek Brown had gone missing, this fugitive who the film's about, and he, was just not your normal top 10 fugitive on the FBI's most wanted list. Um, and the story of what he did appealed to me at a young age because I'd wanted to be a FBI agent before I wanted to be a filmmaker. So I used to kind of know who the fugitives were, and Jason Derek Brown's face really stood out to me. And flash forward to post graduation, and I could not believe that Jason Derek Brown was still missing. I just learned that he was on the lam still. It came up on the news one day, and it was such a weird thing because it was at this time in my life where I was like, I don't know what my first feature is. I know that's the rite of passage that a director has to go through is you've got to make your first feature, you know, and I didn't have the story. I was like, what is it? What is it? And then this guy flashes on my TV in front of me, and I'm like, oh, wait a second. And I just start looking into what happened and how he became a fugitive and what was the crime he had committed and what was the story of this charismatic con man who all these people seem to love and not see the dark side in. And I just was like, this is exactly the kind of movie I want to make and I should write. And I once heard a great quote about writing. It was a Czech filmmaker named Vera Shitilova, and she said, write what makes you angry. And I don't know if I would say the story made me angry, but it definitely made me excited. And it was like, oh yeah, I want to tell this story. Like I woke up every morning being like, I want to do this. So once that story kind of got its claws in me, it changed from, okay, what's my first feature gonna be to be like, okay, what do I have to do to make this first feature, of this story? And so I had to go and wrote it on spec. Because again, I think that for directors, I know a lot of talented, I know of and know a lot of talented directors who don't necessarily write themselves, but it's very hard these days. I think even harder than it maybe used to be because, you know, the days of like people getting hired off music videos and commercials, I don't hear of that happening as much anymore. I'm not saying it doesn't, but I'm hearing of it happening less and less. It seems that, and even those ones like, the Daniels came up through music videos and commercials, but they also write their own movies. It's very hard, to find scripts that are just open for you to direct, especially when you're starting out. Um, as you get further along in your career, that does change. But starting out, it's very hard to get other people's scripts. Because odds are, if it's a really good script, they'll give it to someone more experienced than you. So for me, I realized, yeah, writing was going to be my way in to the director's chair. And so, it was a challenging few years. I mean, because I had this idea. It was pretty ambitious for a first movie. Because they say conventional wisdom is, shoot your first movie in a house, or all in one location, like Reservoir Dogs, right? Or Buried, right? Countless examples of movies that did that, and this didn't do that. American Murder was an ambitious production, and it started out being conceived of as, probably a little lower scale than it was. It was more of just like a road movie following this guy, and then it kind of got opened up and bigger. But basically, what happened was, I just went in head first. Said, okay, this is the story I want to tell. Um, I wrote the screenplay, on spec, and now I had the spec script, and it had been some time since my shorts came out, so I still was able to get a fair amount of meetings, from the rounds I did, but it was kind of like, some of the interest from the shorts had kind of cooled, right? So now I'm like, trying to get people to read it, which is not easy to do. When you think about when you send a script out in this industry, it's like usually you make their weekend read, or, the person you send it will send it to their assistant to read, right? So, it's always a challenge. And people are busy and people have a lot of other scripts to get to. So a great piece of advice I got early on was I used to be really antsy. If someone asked me, an executive or a producer or an agent or a manager or someone I met at a party or being out in the industry, someone asked me like, "Hey, I'd love to read that script. Send it over." Um, you know, or if you tell them an idea and say the script's not ready yet, like never send it too early because you only get one chance for that read. And I don't say that to like freeze you and like, make someone want to be like paralyzed, but like, like never send it. You have to send it eventually when it's ready. But nobody is ever like, re generally people are not really asking for scripts to read. They already have busy people in this industry probably have 10 to read that week. Right. And then in addition to that 10 they have to read that week, they have 10 more they haven't read the week before or people they haven't gone back to. And so, send it when you have a fully cocked fist, right? Because you don't want to send it before. Because again, you only get that one chance. It's very hard to take something back out. Anyways, sidebar over. So with American Murder, I had the script. It was a little hard to get reads. And I had a meeting at a company, and this gentleman said to me, you know, the people I pitched it to seemed interested and excited. All I had was a pitch deck at the time. But the guy was like, I don't think they're going to make it. They're looking for bigger stuff than this. And I was kind of like, well, okay. He said, but I think what would really help is if you made a proof of concept short. And I was kind of like not sure that that was the right route for me. Because I was like, I've done a lot of shorts. I even had people say to me, okay, like you don't need to make any more shorts. Like, your shorts won all these awards, blah, blah, blah. But I didn't necessarily agree with that, but I just didn't know. I was like, okay, and trying to figure out how I would do that. And he said, no, what you need to do is make a proof of concept short because the other shorts you did prove that you can direct, but they haven't proven that you can direct this. And I thought that was a very smart distinction that he made. Um, so I thought about it and I said, okay, so he was saying, don't do a short like your others where they're self-contained stories. Do just a scene from the movie, 3 to 4 minutes. Don't spend too much money on it. Like just shoot something that makes it look cool, shows the tone, shows the vibe, shows the feel. So with that in mind, I was kind of thinking, okay, how can I go about getting this movie made? Now, I had met a lovely actor named Jonathan Groff while I was taping auditions in the William Morrison Never mailroom. And I got to watch Jonathan work many times, and he's one of the best actors I've ever gotten to see and work with. He's just such a talented person. And I thought he'd be fantastic for this script I was writing. So I'd kept in touch with him over the years, and he and I met up for a coffee, and I just said, okay, I'm going to pitch him the project. So I pitched him the story, and he says, that sounds really good. I'd love to read it. Send it to me when you're ready. So I spent a few months agonizing over it. I had had the script in some shape by then, but I wanted it to be better. Then I sent it to him. I think 2 weeks went by, I didn't hear anything. I was like, okay, he hates it. He's never, gonna read it. And then randomly one day in that third week, he wrote me and said, hey, I love the script. I'm sorry, I've been away on Hawaii on vacation with my mom. I love the script. I'd love to read it. I'd love to, hear what you want to do with it. And so he and I talked and he, loosely attached to the project. I was trying to kind of kick it around with him, but at the time, he had done Mindhunter season one had come out, season two was about to come. But sometimes a challenge with film financing is that TV actors don't always translate to the film financiers. So it was a little hard to get it going. But that I was like, you know what, Jonathan, why don't we do a proof of concept short together? Let's shoot one scene, as kind of a way to feel out, the material and all of that. And he was really game. So we shot a proof of concept in one day in the summer of 2018. Um, and when we did that, we finished that short, and that really became the calling card for the movie. And the timing was pretty good because the short came out around the time of his second season of Mindhunter, and so it was able to kind of facilitate some forward momentum for the project. And a lot of producers and companies then started to ask me about it because I think only because, the short wasn't necessarily publicly available, but it was kind of being passed around and it was on mine and Jonathan's IMDb. So I noticed there was a lot more traffic when Mindhunter season two came out. I don't think that's a coincidence. So a few companies approached me. Some were interested in it without me directing the script when they finally got to reading it. Um, and I said no to all of those uh, prospects because I was very determined to direct it, which at the time was kind of a risky decision to make, but it just felt so. clear cut to me. And then two producers slash companies converged on me at the same time. One was called Traveling Picture Show. Then Kevin Matisow and his wife Carissa, partner, they run that company, and Gia Walsh, who runs GG Films. They had kind of both got caught wind of the project, and they converged with me about making it, and so I kind of the three of us kind of came together, and they became my real partners in crime on making this. They optioned the script for me, and you know supported me as a first time director, which is big. As a first time director, finding a producer that believes in you for that and will champion you for that. It's not the easiest thing to find. So I'm very grateful to them, to Kevin G and Carissa for that. Um, and we that all was in, we're talking 2019 now. Um, and then we did some work on the script. They had optioned it, and I was doing rewrites on hire. So it was really my first professional writing job as well. I mean, American Murder was really my first everything. My first job as a writer, my first job as a director. And then we were getting ready. Okay, we were talking about casting loosely, but we had about, I want to say, a year of development, where the script really grew and became much better, thanks to, opening it up and getting the perspectives of my producers, which again was my first time dealing with notes, and like learning how to use notes to make something better and not, make it worse, and it was a real, yeah, real learning curve. But anyhow, 2020 comes around, January, and we're like, okay, we're ready to cast it. So we make our first offer that February, and then the world shuts down. So it became really unclear when this movie would, if ever, get made. I mean, I never, gave up, and I kind of, I'm now working on 5 movies, and I'm a believer that, you know, when you work on something, as a director, I feel, at least for me, you have to just always believe in it, you know, that it's going to get made no matter what. And in a way, that's a bit of my rubric of if I decide to work on something, whether it's my own idea or something someone brings me, which is something that's been happening now, which is nice. But, if I'm like, I have to really to convince an actor to come on board or a cinematographer, or a production designer to not do a cushy job on something else, right? And do my weird indie, like, I've got to have that belief that's what's going to probably attract them, is that vision, that obsession. And, you know, so anyways, sorry, I got distracted. I, yeah, so I really believed in American Murderer, and then 2020 was the last year I thought we would get it made, but it ended up getting filmed in late 2020, early 2021. So it was a real, uh, again, confluence of things coming together, but slowly building over a long period of time. I think by the time we finished the film, I believe it was like a 4 year journey overall, which is like a degree. It's like a college or a grad school, in a way. But yeah, it was a long winding path with many, many anecdotes.
Yeah, and I should mention that the cast you assembled included Tom Pelphrey, Ryan Phillippe, Jackie Weaver, Idina Menzel, Kevin Corrigan, Moises Aries. Like this was quite a cast for someone's first film, especially an indie. How did you end up assembling all of those people together? I mean, I assume it was the quality of the material, but also budget-wise, I'm assuming that was a challenge.
Yeah, and I do think COVID played a big part,
Hmm.
because the odds that all of these great people would have been available in any other time would have probably been not likely. They all work nonstop. Everyone you just mentioned, they're always working. I keep up with them on text and calls sometimes, and they're always on a show, going from thing to thing. Um, so, it's all started with Tom, of course. Finding our Jason, finding our main guy. And, I was excited about who we were going to get because I thought, you know, putting my script aside, that it was just a fun role for an actor, a charismatic con man with a lot of layers to him, an anti-hero. That kind of role, I think, had appeal. And I could see with you know, and it was initially supposed to be Groff. We ended up having to part ways due to he just got so busy after Mindhunter blew up so much that he was unavailable for like 3 or 4 years. But I love him and eager to work with him again. Um, but we had to find our Jason, and there were many names floated, and some we tried, but Tom kind of came almost out of nowhere. Gia Welsh, my producer, called me and said, "Are you watching Ozark?" I was not at the time. And in the same day, my brother, and my one of my best friends, who's a talent agent, they all texted me and said, "Are you watching Tom Pelphrey on Ozark?" And I was like, "Okay, who's this? Who's this guy?" So I watch Ozark, and I put his episode on, and the first 10 seconds, when I was a young actor, I was taking this class at Carnegie Mellon. I remember this teacher said to us, they know with casting in the first 10 seconds if you're right. And I always thought that was a little like far-fetched of an idea from this teacher. But that day I knew she was right because it was like the second I saw Tom, it was like, oh, yes, he would be perfect. He's the guy. It was just so obvious. And it almost made you feel dumb for not seeing it sooner. So I called my producer and I said, yes, all right, let's go after Tom. Um, we weren't guaranteed to get him because he was, white hot off of Ozark and getting tons of acclaim. But his agent, Rhonda Price, she really liked the script and she, I think, was championing it. And, he and I met a couple times and it was a really funny thing as it turned out, when I Zoomed him for the first time, he was actually, I was like, where are you? And he goes, where are you? I'm like, I'm in California. Where are you? He goes, oh, I'm in upstate New York. And I go, oh, really? Which part? And he goes, oh, I'm near like what's town Woodstock. And I go, oh, that's funny. And my parents are in near Woodstock. What part of upstate New York are you in? He goes, oh, I'm in Phoenicia. And he was literally 3 houses down from my parents, just by complete coincidence. You know, so it was I mean, it was so easy to work with him. He's just such a good actor and so dynamic. And once he committed to it, he had a couple notes in the script. I did them, and then he signed on pretty fast. And then once he came on, then we got Ryan to play Lance Lysing, which was a big get for that role. And Tom and Ryan together were a really formidable duo. Because it just kind of started. It was like slow, 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 slow. Then we got Tom, a little like beat, then we got Ryan, and then it was like we were filming in like 6 weeks from that. Because Tom, Ryan, then Adina Menzel, and then every week it was like the cast was just getting so like better and better. I was like, what is going on? Because I had been just used to like getting quite a bit of rejection with it and not, necessarily. And then all of a sudden, it's what they say, you need one yes. You can have as many no's as you want, but it's one yes that gets you there. And it was such a rush. And again, to use the word confluence of just things happening, convergence. Which is why I think there are an element of movies, as much as any other art form and I'm a big believer in preparing and I storyboard, I shot list, I break down my scripts, I do tons of notes and all that. But, there's also an element of this stuff, this work that we do that, writing too, where it's just, there's something out just completely outside of your control. And a movie, in a way, is the epitome of that because it requires, you know, I like to paint on canvas. All I got to do to paint on canvas is just go over there to that side of my room and paint. Write a screenplay. I have to show up at my desk and print pages. But to direct a movie, a lot has to come together. Money, cast, people, personnel, procedures. In our case, COVID
And
protocol.
the inertia of life does not want you to make a movie. You have to push against the current to get it done.
Right, right. I heard Josh Safdie say in an interview recently that with Marty Supreme and Uncut Gems, he was like fighting so long for them, and it's like the world does not want a movie to exist. So there's so much, yes, exactly. There's just so many forces. And there is that extra factor when a movie happens that just is outside of your control, in terms of getting it made, whether it's that actor saying yes or the location, whatever it is, there's something always goes wrong. And then you have to, and I do believe in movie gods. I do believe in them being out there. I don't know what it looks like, but I do believe in it that because how do you explain so many things that just happen in movies? I mean, I was listening to an amazing, highly recommend this. The Criterion had The Graduate on there, and Mike Nichols does this amazing commentary with Steven Soderbergh, and he talks about how he was asking about Mrs. Robinson, and Simon and Garfunkel and how their music made it into the movie. And Mike Nichols goes, "Well, yeah, what happened was my brother had heard the EP early and he brought it to me, and then I just put it on the film and it clicked. It was the first thing we ever put down. That was it." And Steve Soderbergh's kind of like, "What?" And he's like, "Yeah." And Mike Nichols described it as it's like when a movie is like working, sort of like a magnet that just attracts all of these things together that cling to it. Um, and you know, I like it's an interesting thing he was saying. I think there is this element that just, you know, like things do just kind of and directing is a weird, it's a weird, unique job because you are in a way, I mean, the thing I compare it the most to, not that I know a ton about it, but my brother's was conducting, right? Where you have all of these elements coming together, and it's like, how do you orchestrate them to go where you want them to go, right? To say what you want to say, to communicate what you want to an audience. Um,
When it
you
works, it's conducting. When it doesn't work, it's herding cats.
know, yeah, yeah, exactly, exactly. Um, but yeah, so it was no, it was I felt very lucky to get that cast.
Mhm.
I know it wasn't common. To have that on your first feature, but they were amazing, and I felt very supportive of me as a first-time director. There wasn't much of a like, oh, do you know what you're doing, kid thing. I found all of them to be really excited by it and wanting to do it and excited to work. I think, because again, COVID had put everyone on their couches and not on sets, so we were like, and it was the same for the crew as well, the Utah crew. They were all had come from being out of work for several months. So the only shows going in Utah at the time where we filmed were High School Musical, the TV show, and American Murderer.
Of
And we
course,
were
that is the two you would think of when you think of Utah.
exactly, yeah. So it was yeah, it was an amazing thing. And the spirit of the production was really special because, yeah, I think everybody on it was just really excited to be there, to be working and to be working on something I think that they were believed in. A lot of people really responded to the script. Crazy thing about filming in Utah is the real character of Jason Derek Brown, he had ties to that area.
Yeah.
So even though the crime we depicted in the movie actually took place in Phoenix, Arizona, the spirit of it was very much there. There were people on the crew who knew the real Jason, some of whom had like close friends who dated him or lived with him. So they had stories and anecdotes. And I'll tell one story of a crew member that stands out to me. It was a guy named Whitey who worked on the film. Um, and we were doing a wide shot of like an apartment complex kind of thing. And someone's light was on the second floor in a building. And like we needed that light to go off. And of course it's on. And so this guy Whitey just sprints across the car, like, climbs, scales the wall of the building, gets the person to turn off, and then runs back. And I go, Whitey, thank you. I appreciate that, but don't do that, okay? Because I don't want you to run. I don't want you to hurt yourself. Like, okay, it's just a movie. Like, I could turn the camera that way if I need to. And the guy goes, nah, man, I've been out of work for 5 months. You know, I was on hard times before this project started. And this project gave me like purpose, so I'm excited to be on it. I just remember that being really like, I don't know. There's all kinds of reasons why we make movies, but that just seeing the excitement of people. I compared it to like a sports team in the Great Depression. Not that I watch sports, but it was just there was an exciting energy around it. And I think any independent film getting made, something Ryan Phillippe said to me, any independent film getting made today is a miracle. Nothing short of one. You know, anyone who gets a movie made impresses me because it's so hard. And as you said, there's so much inertia trying not to make it happen. So, yeah.
Well, I think that it was very wise of you to you make this your first feature as opposed to something like just in a house, like you said, some people do, because I think you only get one first feature to really make a name for yourself. And with this, you very much did. And now I want to ask you about the future because I know that you mentioned like with development you need to have a lot of pots cooking. You can't put all your eggs in one basket. And I know with development there's a lot you can't reveal, but just telling us what you can reveal, like what are you working on now? What do you think will be the second Matthew Gentile film?
Yeah, the it's very true, and it's a hard lesson to learn because first movie, all that matters is first movie, and you have to put your eggs into all that basket to make your first film. And then you get out of first film and you realize, oh shit, if I want to have a career doing this a long time, you would have to, yeah, be thinking about multiple and juggling. But and there's people that debate that, and when you're making a movie, when you're directing one, you are all in on that, right? When you're shooting, when you're editing, um, when you're in hard pre-production, your hard prep, you're only doing that film. So once you get a green light, you're there for at least sometimes a year, 2 years, right? Depends on the movie, but a year and a half minimum, most likely. You're gonna be mostly doing that. So, but I learned pretty quickly. Oh, well, actually, not that quickly. I learned not that quickly. Yeah, you have to have multiple things going. So, for me, yeah, no, I mean, after American Murder came out, I started to get a lot of work writing, doing screenwriting jobs, and I was also offered some scripts to direct. But a lot of what I was getting when the movie came out and its success, which came a little bit, after its release, like I want to say 6 months to a year after its release, it started to catch, fire that you alluded to earlier. Um, you know, some of the things I was being brought were not exactly what it was I wanted to do. But I'm currently, in referencing the projects, I'm attached to direct a script that two producers brought me. So the first project I did not write. That one's called Dark Highway, and I'm very excited about that project. So the writer is Chris Kyle. He's a fantastic writer and guy, and that's a new area for me. It's a psychological thriller. And then I have many of my own scripts. We have one set up with a financier right now, and another as well, with a different financier. So all three of these movies are making offers to actors. They're all, yeah, one's a psychological thriller, the other two are true crime thrillers that I wrote. So we'll see which one gets greenlit first. There's kind of been, every week it is kind of like a bit of an update on the race. And I'm kind of working on all three and other things that come in, especially writing jobs. But yeah, so I'm prepping away on the one that I think will go most likely go first. But the truth is, I don't know, and that can be a somewhat scary place to be, but it's also an exciting place to be, because I think I do know which of the three to four I'm on will go first. Um, but I'm excited now because, when I made American Murder, that was all I had in the docket. After it was done, I just, I have people like, what do you have next? And I was like, I don't even know. Um, and now I have multiple, so it's nice to know that once the next one goes, I'll have more ready to follow up with that. But yeah, just working on things that excite me. I'm still, in addition to doing writing jobs, I'm also writing my own spec scripts too, which is always, and I write with a partner now. Um, which I was not doing before. I was mostly writing strictly solo, but now I write with a partner, and that's been great. And helping me not just work faster, but also gain more perspective. A big Kurosawa fan, and he talked about how writing alone is great, and it's actually quite fun. Um, and it's easier than writing with someone because you don't have to bump up against someone else's perspective. You can just do whatever you want. But he found it, to use Kurosawa's words, not my own, he found it more limiting because your perspective could be one-sided. When you write with people, whether it's one person or two people or, you know, whatnot, you have multiple perspectives on the same thing, so you can get something more rounded. And I've been finding that working with a partner has been really great for me, just in terms of giving my scripts a little more edge, more dimension, shading, you know. Um, yeah, so working on a lot of different things. That the main thing I've been getting tapped on as a writer is adapting like books, true crime books, crime books. That seems to be my tag. Crime, thriller, definitely is a lane that is easy to tag me on. But I work on a lot of different things, and I'll say some words on the great late Rob Reiner. Looking at his career, and seeing what his body of work like that's being, of course, recalled right now after what happened. You see how he did so many different kinds of films. I mean, Princess Bride, Spinal Tap, Few Good Men, Harry Met Sally, like just such different home runs he was able to hit. And I find those kinds of directors really interesting, to me. I'm reading a biography right now about Michael Curtiz, who's most famous for directing Casablanca, but directed a ton of other kinds of films. I mean, such a variety of movies, Yankee Doodle Dandy to Casablanca to Mildred Pierce, film noir to epic. Like, you know, as much as I love, and I do think Curtiz and Reiner are complete singular, auteurs, whatever you want to call them. But when directors can do a variety of films, that's interesting, you know, to me. Very to me. And I would like to do a variety of films. But yeah, I'm exploring a lot of, I would say, very similar themes, but in different ways. Um,
I can't wait to see the Matthew Gentile rom-com.
yeah, that would be interesting.
And whatever movie you do next is going to be on my most anticipated list of that year.
Oh, thank you,
And
Zach.
and I just want to say thank you so much for being so generous with your time. I sincerely believe that this is one of the best directorial debuts of the decade so far, and I'm
Oh,
rooting for you. And I hope that I get to talk to you again when your next movie comes out and interview you about that. So
thank you, my friend.
thank you. And to everyone listening, please go watch American Murder on Hulu right now. If you don't have Hulu, it's on all the rental platforms like Apple and Amazon. It's extremely entertaining. If you love true crime stories, you're going to get a real kick out of this one. And thank you for listening to this episode of the Cinema Flow podcast. Please be sure to rate us on 5 stars on Spotify and Apple Podcasts. Anything you want to say before you sign out?
No, thank you so much, Zach, and thank you all for listening.
Awesome. All right. See you next time.
Take
Bye.
care.